The high-security test track is a cage of steel and black asphalt. The air thick with burnt rubber and high-octane fuel. A multi-million-dollar supercar screams as it loses its grip, sliding violently toward the concrete barrier. Inside the cockpit, billionaire CEO Elena Ward screams into her radio, "Can anyone control this car?" Elite engineers stand frozen, paralyzed by the sight of their masterpiece turning into a weapon. At the track's edge, a single dad in a worn shirt stands up, shedding his jacket. He raises one hand and whispers into the comms. Suddenly, time stops, and the world holds its breath. His name is Alex Turner, 45 years old, a man whose presence is as quiet and immovable as the eye of a hurricane. To the global investors, the venture capitalists, and the high-profile guests at the Ward Automotive Proving Grounds, he is just a shadow in the background, a contract mechanic hired for the week to handle the dirty work. He is the man who checks the tire pressures, wipes the oil off the carbon fiber panels, and ensures the windshields are crystal clear for the cameras. Alex doesn't wear an Italian-cut suit or carry a glowing digital tablet. He carries the permanent scent of 10W40 in his skin and the weight of 1,000 technical secrets in his weary eyes. Every morning before the facility opens, Alex performs a private ritual. He walks the track barefoot, feeling the texture of the asphalt and the grip of the sealant. He knows which curves hold moisture and which patches of concrete expand too much under the midday sun. He doesn't need sensors. His body is a finely tuned instrument of frequency and vibration. He can tell if a paving machine was off by a millimeter just by the way the air flows over the surface. He watches the way the wind swirls in the hairpin turn, noting how the heat haze distorts the horizon. To everyone else, this is a road. To Alex, it is a living, breathing opponent that demands absolute respect. A few hundred yards away from the burning asphalt, sitting safely inside the climate-controlled cabin of an armored SUV, is 8-year-old Sophie. She is Alex's entire universe, his reason for breathing. She watches the test track through the reinforced glass with wide, trusting eyes. To Sophie, her dad is just the man who makes the best blueberry pancakes and can fix her broken bicycle in 5 minutes. She doesn't know that the men in the VIP lounge would pay millions for just 1 hour of his expertise. Alex takes these short-term, low-visibility contracts precisely because they keep him invisible. He doesn't want the fame. He doesn't want the risk. He just wants to be the man who is always there to pick his daughter up from school at exactly 3:30 p.m. But behind that quiet exterior is a history written in fire and speed. 10 years ago, the name Alex Turner was spoken in reverent, almost religious whispers across the high-performance automotive industry. He wasn't just a driver. He was the ghost of the apex, the legendary lead test pilot and safety instructor who trained the world's most elite racing teams. He was the man who could feel a car's soul through the soles of his racing boots, who could tell if a cylinder was misfiring just by the vibration in the steering rack. But then, the Black Rain incident happened on a track in northern Italy. During a high-speed endurance test, a mechanical failure he had explicitly warned about, a failure the board of directors chose to ignore, claimed the life of his best friend and wingman, Sledge. Alex remembers the smell of burning magnesium and the sound of the emergency sirens that arrived too late. He still hears Sledge's voice over the radio in the final seconds, a static-filled gasp that haunts his dreams. He walked away from the track that day and never looked back. He buried his racing gloves, his championship medals, and his burning ambition. He chose the life of a ghost so he could raise Sophie in a world where the only extreme thing was her playground slide. He traded the roar of the V12 for the silence of a suburban garden, believing he could outrun the ghost of speed. Elena Ward is his polar opposite. At 41, she is the reigning queen of the modern automotive world, a billionaire visionary who believes that technology can conquer nature. She is bold, aggressive, and dangerously talented behind the wheel. Today is her magnum opus event, the public unveiling of the Phoenix 7, a supercar designed to redefine the very limits of physics. The investors are watching from the glass-walled VIP lounge, their fountain pens ready to sign away billions. They are here to see a revolution, a car that can think faster than a human. Elena likes to be in total control. She refused to let a professional test driver take the wheel for the final demonstration, insisting on being the one to push the car to its absolute limit for the cameras. She believes that perfection can be forced, that machines can be dominated by sheer will and superior algorithms. But the Phoenix 7 is a temperamental, dangerous beast. As the midday sun beats down on the black asphalt, the track temperature climbs to a blistering 130 degrees. The tires are beginning to soften beyond their design threshold, the rubber molecules losing their structural integrity. Alex watches from the perimeter safety line, his eyes narrowing as he hears the pitch of the V12 engine change by a few hundred hertz. He sees the way the rear suspension is loading unevenly in the hairpin turns, a micro-oscillation that suggests the torque vectoring computer is beginning to hunt for a solution it can't find. He knows the car is talking, crying out, but Elena and her team of genius engineers in the clean room are not listening. They are looking at data, while Alex is listening to the metal. The Phoenix 7 exits the final hairpin turn at a staggering 140 miles per hour. The engine note is a visceral, metallic shriek that vibrates in the teeth of everyone watching. Elena pins the throttle, looking for that perfect, cinematic high-speed exit for the live stream cameras. But the torque distribution system, a complex array of AI sensors and sub-millisecond algorithms, suffers a catastrophic logic hang. It fails to account for the sudden heat spike in the rear left tire, which is beginning to delaminate under the extreme load. In a fraction of a second, the rear of the car snaps. It's not a gentle, controlled slide. It's a violent snap oversteer that throws the $3 million supercar into a wild, oscillating pendulum toward the concrete barriers. The electronic stability systems try to intervene, but they are fighting against the laws of momentum that have already been broken. The computer is breaking individual wheels in a frantic attempt to find balance, but its inputs are clashing with Elena's panicked corrections. The dashboard is a Christmas tree of flashing red warnings, the steering rack vibrating so hard it threatens to break Elena's wrists. The car is effectively fighting itself, a digital brain screaming against a biological heart. Inside the cockpit, Elena's world becomes a terrifying blur of spinning asphalt and gray concrete. She fights the wheel, sawing at the steering rack, but her adrenaline-fueled panic only makes the car more unstable. The rear tires are now nothing but a mass of white, acrid smoke and molten rubber. "I'm losing it!" Elena screams into the radio, her voice echoing through the high-fidelity speakers in the VIP lounge, sending a wave of silence through the crowd of billionaires. "The steering is locked. The computer isn't responding. Can anyone control this car?" In the pit lane, the lead engineers are in a state of total chaos. They are shouting over each other, their faces pale in the light of their monitors. "Brake! No! Don't touch the brakes! Shift down! Kill the ignition!" Their voices are a useless, frantic mess of conflicting data points. They are looking at screens, not the physics of the disaster. They are looking at graphs, while the car is looking for a wall. The heavy smell of ozone from the failing electrical systems begins to fill the air, mixing with the scent of raw fear. Dr. Aris, the chief designer, drops his tablet, watching as the telemetry lines go vertical. He knows the math, and the math says the car is unsalvageable. Alex Turner steps across the yellow safety line, his boots crunching on the gravel. He doesn't panic. He doesn't shout. He watches the specific angle of the car's slip, the way the front wheels are hunting for even a shred of grip, the rhythmic bounce in the rear chassis. He understands exactly what is happening in the invisible layer of the car's dynamics. He sees the gyroscope failure before the computer even logs it. The car isn't broken. It's just confused. It's trapped in a fatal feedback loop between a terrified driver and an over-analytical computer that is trying to calculate a 0.1 millimeter correction while the car is moving at 200 feet per second. He reaches into his back pocket and pulls out a handheld radio, a backup unit he'd been using to coordinate the fuel trucks. He keys the override frequency for the cockpit. He knows that in 3 seconds, the Phoenix 7 will become a fireball. The head of track security sees him and lunges forward. "Hey, get back! You're just a contractor. You're going to get yourself killed. Stay behind the line." Alex doesn't even turn his head. He raises his left hand, a gesture so sharp, so full of cold, natural authority that the security guard actually stops in his tracks, confused by the sudden shift in the mechanic's energy. Alex's voice into the radio is not a shout. It's a low, melodic rumble that cuts through the static of the other engineers, screaming like a hot knife through butter. "Elena," Alex says into the radio, "this is Alex. If you want to see the sun tomorrow, listen to my voice and nothing else. Close your eyes to the wall and open your ears to me. Forget the screens. Feel the weight." Elena, trapped in a cabin filled with the smell of burning electrics and the sound of a dying turbine, hears that voice. It doesn't sound like a panicked engineer. It sounds like the ground itself. It sounds like safety. For the first time in the last 5 seconds, her heart rate slows from 180 beats per minute. She stops fighting the wheel, her hands hovering, waiting for the word of a master. "The computer is fighting your fear, not the car," Alex continues, his eyes locked on the sliding supercar as if he were part of the machine. "I'm going to tell you 3 things. If you do them exactly when I say, the car will come back to you. If you hesitate for even a millisecond, you're hitting that wall in 3 seconds. Are you ready?" The entire test track falls into a deathly, absolute silence. The billionaires in the lounge lean against the glass. The engineers stop their typing. Everyone is looking at the man in the worn work shirt standing alone in the middle of the track, holding a plastic radio like it was a scepter. Alex's voice is the only thing left in the world. "Throttle off, steering open, look far." Alex's words are not a suggestion. They are a command from a man who has mastered the laws of motion. They are spoken with a rhythmic, hypnotic calm that seems to vibrate the very air. In that moment, to Elena, the world slows down into individual frames of film. The screaming of the V12 engine fades into a dull, distant hum. The spinning horizon stops being a threat and becomes a set of mathematical coordinates. Elena does it. She lifts her foot entirely off the accelerator, a move that goes against every survival instinct of a driver trying to power through a crisis. The weight of the car shifts forward with a violent, mechanical groan, loading the front tires, giving them a tiny, microscopic window of grip that the computer had previously ignored. The front end dives, searching for purchase on the sun-baked track. She feels the vibration in the brake pedal change, the resonance shifting from a chaotic rattle to a steady hum. "Steering open," Alex whispers, almost like a sacred prayer. Elena lets the steering wheel slip through her fingers, centering the rack. For a heartbeat, the car is pointed straight at the concrete wall, a move that looks like suicide to everyone watching from the pits. But it is the only way. By opening the steering, the tires stop scrubbing against the asphalt and start rolling again. The friction becomes traction. The molecular bond between the rubber and the road is restored. The car is no longer fighting itself. It is a moment of pure physics, neutralizing the angular momentum that was tearing the car apart. "Look far," Alex commands, his voice growing even steadier. Elena forces her eyes away from the gray concrete barrier that is inches from her nose, away from the hood of the car, and looks 300 yards down the track, toward the horizon, toward the place where she wants to be. The human brain is a miracle. When it focuses on a destination, the body's nervous system follows without thought. She sees the exit of the turn, she sees the open road, and she commits to it. The physics of the recovery are visceral. The Phoenix 7 shudders, a deep, structural vibration that rattles Elena's bones as the front tires finally bite into the asphalt. The rear of the car, once a wild, swinging pendulum, suddenly snaps back into a perfect line. The electronic stability system, finally receiving a coherent, calm input from the driver, kicks in with a series of sharp, metallic clicks, breaking individual wheels with surgical precision to settle the chassis. The car straightens out. The tires find their grip with a sound like a thunderclap that echoes off the stadium walls. The white smoke begins to clear, revealing the sleek, red lines of the supercar. Elena brings the car to a slow, dignified halt in the middle of the straightaway, the engine idling with a low, guttural growl. Like a beast that has been tamed, the entire proving grounds falls into a silence so absolute it feels heavy. Not a bird chirps, not a fan whirs. The investors in the lounge are frozen, their pens still hovering over their contracts. It is as if the universe has taken a deep breath and is holding it in its lungs. Elena can hear the cooling metal of the car ticking, a sound of a machine returning from the edge of the abyss. Alex Turner doesn't celebrate. He doesn't pump his fist or look for the cameras. He simply raises his hand one last time, a silent, professional signal to the track safety crews to move in and check the fluids. He turns his back on the million-dollar car, on the billionaire CEO, and on the shocked crowd. He picks up his worn jacket from the dusty ground and starts walking toward the safety SUV where Sophie is waiting. Inside the SUV, Sophie is clapping her hands. "Did you fix it, Daddy? Did you fix the fast car?" Alex opens the door and smiles. A real warm smile that washes away the ghost of the apex. "Yeah, Sophie, we fixed it. Let's get you some lunch." Elena Ward sits in the cockpit, her hands still gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles are white. Her chest is heaving as she tries to find enough air to fill her lungs. She looks through the windshield at the retreating back of the man in the work shirt. She has spent her entire life around the world's greatest drivers, the fastest, the loudest, the most arrogant. But she has never, in her entire career, seen anything like what just happened. She realizes that she didn't save the car. The algorithms didn't save the car. The man who checked her tire pressures, he saved her life. She watches the way Alex walks, no ego, no swagger, just the steady pace of a man who knows he has done his duty. She realizes that true power doesn't scream, it whispers. The ghostly heat of the track rises around her, but for the first time she feels cold with the realization of her own hubris. Elena steps out of the Phoenix 7, her legs trembling so violently she has to lean against the hot door for support. Her lead engineer, a man named Dr. Aries, rushes over, his face a mask of sweating embarrassment and technical confusion. "Elena, are you okay? The data, we don't know what happened. The sensors showed a thermal overload in the torque vectoring bus. The AI must have suffered a logic loop." Elena doesn't even look at him. She pushes past the team, past the investors who are now coming down from the lounge, and walks straight toward the safety SUV parked at the edge of the lot. Alex is already there, bucking Sophie into her booster seat, checking the straps with the same precision he used on the track. "Wait," Elena calls out, her voice still shaky, lacking its usual corporate steel. "Stop! Who are you?" Alex pauses, his hand on the door handle. He looks at her, his expression completely neutral, as if he hadn't just performed a miracle. "I'm the guy who checks your tire pressures, Miss Ward. Your rear left was 2 psi high due to the track heat. That was the logic loop your sensors were crying about. You should have checked the manual on thermal expansion. Section 4, paragraph 3. "You're not just a mechanic," Elena said, stepping closer, her eyes searching his face. "I've seen elite racers freeze in that situation. I've seen world champions hit that wall at half that speed. You didn't just tell me what to do. You commanded the car through me. No one has that kind of authority over a machine unless they are the one who built the rules of the game." Dr. Aris catches up, holding a tablet with a trembling hand. "Ma'am, I just ran a biometric scan on the contract staff logs. We didn't have his full file. He was hired through a third-party maintenance agency under the name Al. But look at this." He turns the screen toward Elena, his eyes widening in shock. "Look at the history. This is Commander Alex Turner. the chief flight and dynamics instructor for the Global Racing Federation, the man who literally wrote the apex safety protocols used by every team on this planet. The silence returns, but this time it is heavy with religious awe. The engineers look at Alex as if they are seeing a ghost or a god. One of them remembers Chapter 8 of Alex's textbook, the one about the human factor in mechanical chaos. They realized they had been lecturing and ordering around the man whose textbooks they had studied in university. They had been trying to shortcut the very safety standards he had spent a lifetime designing. Elena looks at the digital file, then back at Alex. She realizes that the magnum opus she was so proud of was a reckless, dangerous toy compared to the wisdom standing in front of her. Alex had redesigned the safety protocols for the very engine architecture they were using, protocols she had ordered to be streamlined to save 6 months on the production timeline. "I mocked your safety reports when they came across my desk," Elena whispers, the realization hitting her like a physical blow to the stomach. "I thought they were for people who were afraid to drive fast. I thought you were just an overly cautious consultant. I almost died because I didn't respect the limits you defined. I tried to build a god, but I forgot that a god still needs a steady hand." Alex just nods slowly, his hand resting on Sophie's head. "Power is only useful if you can control it, Ms. Ward. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive, very loud way to die. Speed without wisdom is just a slow suicide." The sun is beginning to set over the testing grounds, casting long, orange and purple shadows across the asphalt. The air has cooled, but the track still radiates a ghostly heat. The test session is officially over. The investors are gone, their confidence shaken, but their respect for the Ward brand actually higher than before. Because they didn't just see a car, they saw a miracle of human intervention. Elena finds Alex one last time in the quiet hangar. He is finished with his shift, his metal toolbox packed and locked. He is washing the grease from his hands with industrial soap, a slow and deliberate process. "Alex, I'm not going to offer you $1 million to drive for me," she says, her tone finally humble, sincere, and human. "Because I know you don't want the money, and you certainly don't want the fame, but I am asking you to be our chief of safety and human performance. We need a conscience. We need someone who cares more about the people in the seats than the speed on the digital clock. We need to remember that the human factor isn't a variable, it's the constant." Alex looks at Sophie, who is coloring in a book on a nearby bench, humming a song to herself. He looks back at Elena. "I have a daughter, Ms. Ward. I don't do overtime. I don't do international press tours. I don't do emergency board meetings. And I leave every single day at 3:15 p.m. to be at her school gate by 3:30. Those are not suggestions. Those are the only terms of my life. If I can't be a father first, I'm no good to you as a specialist." Elena smiles, a real, genuine smile that her board of directors has never seen. It's a smile of relief. "Your daughter can have the executive office next to yours. We'll build her the best playground in the city right here on the grounds if that's what it takes. We'll hire the best tutors to be here when you're working. As long as you keep us from hitting the wall, as long as you teach us how to listen to the metal, we'll do whatever it takes to keep you here." Alex shakes her hand. His grip is firm, the grip of a man who knows exactly where his boundaries are and isn't afraid to defend them. Sophie runs over and grabs her dad's hand, her eyes bright. "Did you finish your work, Daddy? Can we go now?" "Yes, Sophie," Alex says, lifting her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "The work is done. The cars are all sleeping. Let's go get that triple scoop ice cream I promised, with extra sprinkles." Elena watches them walk out of the hangar and into the cool, quiet evening air. She looks at the Phoenix 7 sitting in the middle of the floor, its massive engine cooling down with a series of soft, rhythmic, metallic ticks. The car looks smaller now, less like a god and more like a tool. She realizes that the greatest technology in the entire world is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Compared to the power of a man who knows when to step up, and more importantly, when to stay quiet and be a father. She picks up a wrench lying on a nearby bench and feels the weight of it. She decides then and there that tomorrow she'll start her training again. Not to be the fastest, but to be the one who finally listens to the metal. She looks at the track one last time, the asphalt now cold and dark under the moon. She understands now. The apex isn't a point on a curve. It's the balance between the machine and the soul. If you believe that true skill shows up when the world is panicking, subscribe for more stories of the masters hidden in the shadows, and leave a comment. What is the most valuable lesson you've learned from someone who stayed calm when you couldn't? Let's talk about it below.